All right, before we went on the break, we told you that we are counting down to the 2023 elections. And a former president of the Nigeria Bar Association, Dr. Olisa Agbakoba, has made his observations about the ongoing campaigns. And he says candidates should do more to proffer solutions to Nigeria's existential threats. He joins us now on TVC Breakfast. Good morning, Dr. Agbakoba, and thank you for joining us. Now, when
Thank
I
you.
looked at the report you released, the policy document you released, one of the things you spoke about in that document is that Nigeria has never been this disunited and disordered. And I'm wondering, from your point of view, how did we get to this point?
I think with the region politics and the fact that politicians are generally more interested in themselves than in the nation, so a lot of issues have arisen. And as you know, we have at least three major fault lines: ethnic, religion, and language. So the politicians, unfortunately, have played into this and created the most divided country in the last 8 years. But the excitement, having said that, is that the issues in the current electoral cycle is very exciting because for the first time we have real issues thrown up by all the candidates. And I've read them and I compliment all the candidates for at least for the first time focusing on some of the issues which, if implemented by whoever wins, is likely to see a new Nigeria. And that's what we all pray for.
Right, I'm talking about this issue based. I would like you to, give us some more context as to why you think this particular electioneering period is good for us as a people, as a nation, looking at the issues at display, but then you also talk about the solutions not, or the preferred solutions not satisfactory enough.
Yeah, well, in the last 8 years, in the 2019 elections, there were no issues. 2015, none. 2011, none. So the fact that we have issues today is very encouraging. So now, all the candidates speak about how they will unite Nigeria. So they all recognize the divisions that we have. All the candidates speak to the issue of insecurity. So they recognize that that is a problem. All the candidates speak to the issue of restructuring, even though they do it in different ways. All the candidates speak to the issue of mass poverty. So at least they recognize what Nigerians are looking for. Now, what I thought was a bit missing, which is why I would encourage the candidates to perhaps take a second look at their manifestos, is the issue of insecurity. Insecurity started in the Boko Haram area, and it's like a small mustard seed that has absolutely swallowed up Nigeria. Some candidates say that they will upgrade the police force to about 1 million. Others say they will look at the Lake Chad area, which is a very volatile area for Al Qaeda activity in West Africa. But whatever they need to do, what's important is for them to be able to proffer clear-cut solutions that we as voters can say, yes, this candidate seems to be the one who, if voted, is likely to deal with the problem. The other point that was raised in our report concerns the local government structure. I thought the candidates should have addressed that in more detail. 90% of Nigerians reside at the local government, region. And you recall, even the president, Buhari, had said that the fragile nature of the local governments was a source of concern. So I'd like to see the candidates speak to the issue of protecting the funding of local governments. Right now, we know that state governors take all their money and give them whatever they want. Now, the local governments are therefore unable to deliver. So I'd like for the candidates to really tighten up that part of their manifesto. We need to see a democratically elected local government structure in 2023. So some of the candidates need to speak to that issue in a more aggressive way.
Now, speaking about the matter of insecurity, there are those who perhaps think that this matter of disunity, like you pointed out, is also fueling the insecurity crisis that we are facing, because certain religious groups have been, tagged as those who are fueling the security crisis we are facing. Certain groups, ethnic groups, have been tagged as those also fueling this crisis. And I wonder what you say to that.
Yes and no. I don't know which comes first, the chicken or the egg. But what's important is to identify insecurity as a big issue. And in doing so, I think the candidates need to spend a bit more time reflecting on the nature of the security architecture that they will put in place if elected. I think the candidates need to consider the importance of space technology. None of them address that issue. Now, if you talk about Zambezi Forest, this is not something that is too big. But if you want to have a new architecture, I personally will recommend the deployment of satellite technology. I will also recommend the deployment of what we call in intelligence photons, that is photographic intelligence and communications intelligence. I don't think that resolving the insecurity crisis in Nigeria is a big issue. What's important is for the candidates to be very clear in their manifesto as to exactly what they will do if elected to resolve the issue of insecurity. Tied to insecurity is the issue you raised, this the fact of religion and all that. But I feel that if the security architecture is strong enough, that will calm down the divided Nigeria that we've seen thus far.
You've also questioned the legitimacy of the amended 1999 constitution and called for previously an autonomous local government. Looking at the ongoing exercise on constitutional amendment across the states' houses of assembly, what are your thoughts, especially when you look at some states who are voting against local government autonomy? And that is one of the key points you raised in your report. What do you make of this, this back and forth?
I think that let's start by saying that the Constitution handed to us in 1999 is not legitimate, because the Constitution said we the people, but that's not true. That was given to us by the military. So starting from there is to recognize that all the constitutional amendment processes in the National Assembly lacks authenticity and legitimacy. And I'm just thinking that one of the ways to resolve all this is for a candidate to absolutely lay down a clear plan. Right now, everything is mixed up. I would like to see a candidate to say, if elected, I'm likely to do A, B, C, D, without prejudice to what's been going on. What's going on is chaos. We have the National Assembly moving in one direction, and you have the state assemblies moving in another direction. I'd like to see a presidential candidate say to Nigerians, if elected, I recognize that the Constitution is not legitimate. I will resolve that. If elected, I will do A, B, C, D. And in particular, I'd like to hear a candidate say that I will legitimize the 774 or even more local governments. And I will also provide constitutional funding for that process. Because the state governors have sat on the local governments in the last 20 years and rendered them useless. And therefore, at the base of Nigeria, you find an extremely fragile governance system. And that's why we're not developing. And that's why we have this high number of people in poverty. So it's a crucial area for the candidates to focus on.
But what you hear most persons say is that they recognize local government autonomy. They recognize the fact that this level of government has its responsibilities, and they support whatever it is, and they also, separate themselves from whatever corruption that the president pointed out that is going on. Is a constitutional amendment the way to go to addressing that, really?
I think so. Sorry. I think so. The fact is, the local government structure is not working. That's just the fact. It's not rocket science to say so. If you want the local governments to work, then I need to hear a presidential candidate say, I'm going to make it work. So President Buhari was very correct when he indicated that most state governors do not fund the local governments to the extent budgeted from the federation account. And that's why they're not developing. That's absolutely why you have chaos in the local governments. They don't do anything. All they do is at the end of the month, they go collect their stipends and go home. They have no work. So if we're going to turn around poverty, you remember the poverty report just came out indicating that 33 million Nigerians live in abject poverty, education, health, living standards, and employment. How do you turn this around? The only way you can do so is to have a new government structure close to the people. But if the state governors of whatever party would continue the practice of disabling the local government process, I don't think we're going to go anywhere. We'll just have another 4 years, and in 2027, we'll be probably 200 million Nigerians in abject poverty. So it is fundamental that the presidential candidates recognize, and indeed they do, actually, in their manifestos, they do. So what they need to do is to make sure that when they come into office, whoever comes into office, will take practical, immediate steps to correct that anomaly. Very important if Nigeria must move forward.
But do you honestly think that this is a solution that can only come from the commander-in-chief, the president? Because many share your opinion that we need to get it right in, enshrining local government autonomy. But then there are even other learned individuals from even the legal society, legal circles, who say, ideally, our own style of federalism is the federal government and the state government. The local government is an appendage, they say, of the state government. And so, this issue of autonomy that many are clamoring for might just be elusive.
Yes, I get your point. I mean, there are different views about what is the structure of the local government. But we've got to also take into consideration the type of there's no one-size-fits-all federation. So you will find in federal systems across the world, they shape their federalism to fit what will work for them. Now, what I think, with respect, will work for us is to recognize that in the last 20-something odd years, state governors have pocketed local government systems, and therefore there's a need to protect them. I take the point that the local government system may be seen as part of the state, administrative structures, and so why do you need to provide a separate constitutional process for them? Yes, I understand that. But has it worked? That's the issue. It hasn't worked. So if we really want to address the issue of development in Nigeria, then we're going to say to ourselves, how do we tackle multidimensional poverty? The multidimensional poverty index that just came out indicates, for instance, that Sokoto State has 98% of its population living in absolute abject poverty. And in other states, that is also reflected. Now, what's the cause of this? I will argue that the cause is the failure of the local government system. So the solution for me, and I don't say I'm right, I'm just offering a solution. The solution for me is to strengthen that process of government. You got to keep them isolated in a way that they can function without the state governors breathing down their neck. That's my own personal opinion. And if that is correct, then I would recommend to the candidates to develop a position to strengthen the local governments when they are in office. And if that happens, I can assure you we will see dramatic change in Nigeria's development trajectory.
All right, let's speak to the matter of economy now. Most of the candidates have spoken to the fact that they would want to move Nigeria from a consumption nation to a production nation, a country that produces. And then they also talked about industrialization. And from your document, you said Nigeria is in technical recession. I'm wondering if this measures, production, industrialization, is the way to go to move us out of this technical recession that we have found ourselves.
I didn't quite hear you. Your voice was sort of like muddled. So could you come back? Could you repeat the question, please?
Right. I said that most of the documents that I've read with regards to the manifestos from the presidential candidate, a majority of them have said that they want to move Nigeria from a consumption nation, from being a nation that consumes to being a nation that produces what it consumes, basically. And they also spoke about industrialization. And I'm asking if these are the way to go to move us out of the technical recession that you pointed out in your document.
Yes. So you're discussing the issue of what is the appropriate economic framework that we ought to be adopting. And that, I think, is the very true question. Because there are two things here. There is the political side and there's the economic side. And both of them we refer to as the political economy. So once we fix the political side, the issue of local government, the issue of restructure, the type of constitution, the issue of insecurity, I would advise the candidates to begin to look at what type of economic policy do they want to put in place. I mean, we have state capitalism and we also have market fundamentalism. So which is it that they want to use? Whatever system any candidate feels would work for his agenda, it must be clearly articulated. It must be very specific. I find that if a lot of the manifestos are a bit too general, and we need to see more flesh. But what I think would be relevant in moving Nigeria forward, because we've been lagging for the last 20 years. And if we really want to leapfrog, then we've got to consider how to link what I think are the 5 important elements of any viable economic policy, together with the macroeconomic part of it. Now, if we do that, we will do something very crucial. We will cease to be import dependent. We will become productive. We will move from consuming to producing. The question of foreign exchange will become irrelevant. The reason why Forex is such a big issue is because we don't produce anything. We're importing everything. So an economy that is not growing, that is not producing, that is not manufacturing, cannot be said to be a stable economy. So the candidates will, of course, have to interrogate how they will reverse our dependence on importation of everything. And that is the only way we can put our people to work. Right now, we're importing toothpicks, we're importing soap, we're importing, name it. And it's absolutely ridiculous to see this level of importation when we have people at home that can do it. So I would expect that the president of Nigeria in 2023 will put Nigeria first. You know, like what President Trump used to say. And we thought maybe he was mad. There's a certain sense in the madness of President Trump. If I were a Nigerian president, I will put Nigerians first, because that's the only way that we can grow the economy. Is it not ridiculous that we have to import all our fuel? So we're importing inflation, whilst we have the crude oil right under our soil. That is the reason why we can't control the price of oil. If we had refineries working, and I don't see what is rocket science about the refineries working, then you will create jobs. But if you are importing fuel, you are importing inflation. Everything imported has an inflation index attached to it. So a Nigerian president, and we need to see that in the manifestos of all the candidates, should address how the economy will grow and stop being a consumptive economy and becomes a productive economy.
Right, but quickly, looking at the interventions the central bank has introduced few weeks to the general election of next year, how sustainable do you really think they are? And are they policies that you would like to see in the next administration? The new Naira notes, that may have come to stay, but then looking at the cashless policy drive of the federal government with its announcement yesterday, what do you think about that?
That's an exceedingly touchy area for me. I think the central bank is overstretched. The role of the central bank across the world is macroeconomic stability, financial system stability, and monetary policy rates management. The present central bank has gone way beyond its remit and is interfering in fiscal policy, and there's the distortion between what the Ministry of Finance is doing and the CBN. So, in fact, the question you raised is an important one because I'd like to see a Nigerian president say to the central bank, you're doing far too much. And a new central bank legislation ought to be proposed to limit the role of the central bank to exactly what central banks do. The central bank is not a development bank, but the central bank is throwing money around the whole place. That's not the job of the central bank. That's the job of a development bank. So a Nigerian president that comes into office next year should understand exactly what a CBN should be doing. And then the Ministry of Finance ought to be engaged in developmental roles that can create jobs. At the end of the day, what we all need in Nigeria is jobs, jobs, and jobs. That's all that we need. The CBN is not designed to create jobs. The CBN is designed to control lending rates, exchange rates, and in particular, control inflation. That's the job of the central bank. And then have financial systems stability. That's, for me, is the traditional core function of the bank. So I would like to see a Nigerian president say to the central bank next year, you are doing far too much. I'm going to propose legislation to curtail the role that you play in the Nigerian economy.
Now, still looking at the matter of the Nigerian economy, there's still another sensitive matter which has to do with our debt burden. The finance minister came out recently to say that we do not need debt relief, that we are meeting up our obligation, so to speak. But when the next president comes on board, how would you like for him to address the matter of our debt burden?
To address the matter of what? Sorry, I didn't get that last part.
Address the matter of our debt burden.
We don't have a debt burden. We simply have a very poor fiscal framework. Now, the first thing you do as a government, now let me talk about whoever becomes president, is to say, exactly how much do I need to borrow? And this is what we'll call PSBR. So there's a public sector borrowing requirement. You've got to determine what that is. And this public sector borrowing requirement must be such that would add to the Nigerian economy. It's not to go pay salaries. It must be productive. That's one. But before you even determine what you want to borrow, you must ask yourself, exactly what do I have in my bank? I don't know whether you recall that the Minister of Finance herself said, oh, we have suddenly discovered that we have 33 trillion naira locked away in what is called MOFI, that is the Ministry of Finance Incorporated. This is an entity that houses a lot of the government assets. And she also said that the huge Nigerian Railway Corporation is valued at 20 million naira only. So what I would say before we start talking about debt burden is to ask, what exactly do we have in our bank? What are our assets? I was once involved in a case concerning the abandoned federal government secretariat in Ikoyi. It's been abandoned for the last 40 years. The value of that building is about 140 billion. Now, if that thing was sold and not left standing empty, it would fix the east-west road. So we need to look in, and I also saw a report from the Federal Ministry of Justice. It was trying to harmonize all abandoned landed property in Nigeria owned by the federal government. And if I recall correctly, the value was put at something like 20 trillion. So we have 20 trillion coming out of abandoned land of the federal government. We have 33 trillion being stated by the Minister of Finance. That is 53 trillion. Our current budget is 22 trillion. There's a deficit of 7 trillion. So if you put all this together and do all the calculations, you find that we're actually in surplus. But the problem is no one is looking at these issues. That's the problem. So I would expect a Nigerian president to be very, very, very savvy on finances. Look inwards. It's just like a household. The first thing you do before you borrow money to pay school fees is to ask exactly what do I have in my bank. If I have enough money to pay school fees, why should I go and borrow? So I need to see an audit of federal government's finances to determine whether we actually need to borrow anything. I don't think we need to borrow anything. I need to see a president grow our GDP at double digits, cut our lending rates to single digits, and that will spur employment and jobs and create wealth. That's what I need to see a Nigerian president do in 2023.
And you also proffer a solution, that is tied to Nigeria's economy. This time around in the legal sector, where you are a major stakeholder in, you're talking about the need to introduce an administration of civil justice bill. We have the criminal justice element, and now you're talking about the civil justice element, which you say will help to hasten proceedings in court as against the delays that the regular courts are fraught with.
Yeah, okay. You are touching a micro issue in a macro problem. The macro problem is that we have complete legal failure in Nigeria. It takes a case filed at the High Court 15 years to get to the Supreme Court. So who's likely to invest in this sort of country where the laws are unstable, sanctity of contract is unclear? So what I was saying there is that the president of Nigeria next year needs to dismantle the legal and judicial systems and create a new system that is efficient and functional and can meet the interests of not just poor people, but people who want to invest money. So I would be dismantling the entire legal and judicial system and creating and erecting a new, fresh one. And all those laws I have referred to in the report that will be released would be important in achieving the process that I have identified. If you have legal failure, no one's going to come here. If your institutions don't work, if you have regulatory failure, then it's unlikely that people want to come to invest. Another point I need to point out, just going back to the issue you raised about our so-called debt burden. I have worked in Apapa for 40 years. I have never seen a more disunited place like Apapa. All the roads don't work, yet the Customs Controller General says that Apapa ports can give the federal government 20 billion naira every day. That comes to about 7.6 trillion a year. So why isn't the federal government working on it? That is an area I would expect any of the candidates to absolutely look into. Apapa ports will bring this government massive revenue. So it's an area that I would be expecting a candidate to really address very seriously. Because if you see, I've mentioned 33 trillion from the Minister of Finance. I've talked about the abandoned landed properties across Nigeria by the report of the Federal Ministry of Justice. I have just referred to the Apapa ports and the potential to bring in revenue. So we are not a poor country. It is that we don't manage our resources, and therefore we look as if we don't have resources.
All right, we need to quickly bring in this question before we let you go, Dr. Agbakoba. The issue of corruption, lack of transparency, and accountability. It's been a major issue. And I want you to just perhaps talk to us on what you would expect when the next president comes in 2023. A lot of Nigerians have been speaking to the matter of addressing corruption and accountability.
Yeah, I think the starting point again would be to recall what I just said about legal failure. So if you deal with legal failure, that will help the process. Then the second thing will be to identify exactly what institution can do what. Right now, we have the EFCC as Nigeria's premier anti-corruption agency. I think the EFCC is saddled with too many responsibilities. It's investigating crime, it's prosecuting crime, and it's trying to recover assets. Three things in one. The EFCC doesn't have the capability to do all these three jobs. And I challenge anyone to tell me where in the world you have any EFCC doing three things in one. So I will recommend to any Nigerian president next year to restrict the role of the EFCC to investigation, and then to create an efficient state prosecution service outside of the Ministry of Justice. Just like you have in the UK, you have the Crown Prosecution Service. Now, if you have efficient anti-corruption agencies, then people will be afraid to be involved in corrupt practices. But right now, no one's afraid.
All right.
Yeah, okay.
We have run out of time, but we need to end the conversation here now. But we must thank you, Senior Advocate of Nigeria and former President of the Nigeria Bar Association, Dr. Olisa Agbakoba, for your time on the program.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you.